Welcome to the People, Property, Place podcast. My name's Matthew Watts and I'm your host. And this is the show where I sit down with the movers, shakers, innovators and leaders across the real estate industry to unpack their career journey, views and opinions. But today on the show, we're going to do something slightly different. Today, I'm joined by a friend of mine, Harry Wentworth Stanley of BauMont Real Estate Capital, to talk about this incredible challenge that he's doing in memory of his late brother, James, who took his life 20 years ago. So Harry, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Not at all. Well, look, talk to me about this mad, incredible challenge that you are due to embark on imminently.
So as you touch on, 20 years ago, I lost my brother James to suicide. And when James died, I made a commitment. I don't know exactly when it was, but at some point in the months that followed, I made a commitment that every decade I would do something big in his memory to celebrate him and to keep him at the forefront of my mind and of everyone else's minds. And so here we are, 20 years on, and I have a challenge that I've been cooking up for probably the last, it's been on the mind for about 2 years. And I started training for it last summer. And the challenge is a multi-day ultra endurance triathlon, which is a bit of a mouthful, traveling from Newcastle to London via Liverpool and Birmingham. And some people might be wondering where the swim might happen between those cities. I've had to sub out the swim for a paddleboard, and the paddleboard will be down the canals. So the challenge is cycling from Newcastle to Liverpool. That's going to be 1 day, 170 miles. Paddleboarding down the canals between Liverpool and Birmingham, which is 107 miles, and then a 4-day run from Birmingham to London, which is 135 miles. I hope I've got all those mileages correct.
You have.
I've had to describe the challenge quite a few times. It's quite a long-winded one to get out, and yeah, overall an 8-day challenge between those 4 cities. Raising money for James's Place, which is the charity that my parents founded in memory of my brother, and celebrating James, and yeah, it's an exciting.
It's mad. I mean, some of those distances, to put it into kilometres, 272 kilometre cycle, 172 kilometre paddleboard, and then a 218 kilometre run, which is, I think it's 4 days of 55 kilometre splits per day.
Yeah. And it's funny because the more I talk about the challenge, the more apprehensive I get about it, because it was something that as I said, it's obviously quite bespoke. And I know that each of those legs is feasible in isolation. But obviously putting them all together is something else. And I sincerely hope that I haven't bitten off more than I can chew. I must admit, I'm a little worried about trying to stand upright on a paddleboard after cycling 270 kilometers. But I'm sure I can do it. And I've thrown myself in deep into training since last summer. And I don't think there's, you can do as much training as you like, but you're probably never going to be able to prepare yourself entirely for covering those sorts of distances. And after a while, it's going to be me against myself, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've never travelled anything like those distances or taken on a challenge like that, or even, taken on a marathon, which I know a lot of people are doing. But you're doing more than a marathon back to back over 4 days off the back of a significant paddleboard and a cycle. And, you certainly haven't scrimped and saved, on trying to make it easy for yourself. So it's an absolutely mammoth challenge. And I know you're looking to raise £100,000 for James's Place.
That's the plan. Yeah. So I did a challenge 10 years ago, which was rowing across the Atlantic. And the reason for mentioning that is because that was to mark the 10-year anniversary of losing James. And the purpose of doing that challenge, or maybe even the product of doing the challenge, was we raised a significant sum of money, which allowed us to open the first James's Place Centre, which was in Liverpool, and obviously remains there and has been operational since 2018. And here we are 10 years on, and we have now opened 4 centres. We have actually this month, we've just opened the latest centre in Birmingham, which is very exciting. And we are fundraising currently for our 5th centre, which, all being well, and assuming that we stay on track fundraising wise, will be opening in next year. I can't say where, but we'll be opening in another major UK city next year. And so it's been a really amazing journey that we've had in these last 10 years. And actually, this challenge is quite symbolic in many ways, because firstly, James was studying in Newcastle when he died, and that's where the challenge starts. And the challenge finishes in London, which is where me and James grew up, and my family were based when we were young. So there's that kind of symbolic component to it. It's kind of retracing some of the steps that we've made as a family, and on the route, kind of retracing the steps of James's Place, and seeing the legacy that we've been able to create in his memory, which we're obviously very, very, very proud of. And so, yeah, being able to kind of go centre to centre and see the leaps that we've made in his memory will be quite special.
Talk to me about James and his story, your story and your family's story.
So James was my elder brother. He was 4 years older than me. And he was 21 when he died. And he obviously left this earth way before his time. And what saddens me is that he had such a bright and brilliant future ahead of him. He was kind of the Pied Piper of our family. We were a big band of kids, and he was always the kind of the leader of our gang. And I really just aspired to be everything that he was. And when he died, he was studying in Newcastle. So he was 21 years old. He had as I said, such a bright future ahead of him. He was sporty, academic. He was very popular. He had it all sort of going on. And he wasn't someone who had sort of long-standing mental health condition or anything. There's quite a common misconception that, people who take their own life have psychiatric issues. James had nothing of the sort. But like many people, he found himself in a suicidal crisis. And that suicidal crisis was driven by some life events. So in his case, he had an operation to correct a varicocele on one of his testicles, and the operation had gone well, but he persuaded himself that it hadn't, and he that sort of triggered a very sharp decline over the course of probably a fortnight. And it happened so quickly that we really couldn't fathom what was unraveling. And so we went from this situation where, I always kind of look back and think, we had this very enviable family network, and we were so fortunate. We'd had such a privileged childhood, and I really viewed our family as being this perfect little world. And then suddenly, James took his own life, and it was incomprehensible, frankly, that he would have done that. It didn't make any sense. The warning signs, they weren't really there in a sort of severe enough fashion to create real alarm. And James joined the statistics, which which we then, learnt about after his death, which are that suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 35. So actually, now I know, and we as a family know so much about suicide and suicide prevention, but we've obviously learnt that through experience. And, now we know that the thing that was most likely to kill James was himself as a 21-year-old man. But obviously then it was just a total shock, and our world just unraveled really on an evening. And so that set us onto a journey, a bit of a roller coaster to start with, of just trying to make sense of how we'd got to this place. And I think, ultimately has sort of put us onto the path of starting James's Place and where we are today.
So there was no indication or no real disposition to point to the fact that he could take his life, or he was in that mindset?
So there was, in retrospect, we discovered that he had reached out for help. So he'd gone to his GP in Newcastle where he was studying, and he'd expressed that he was considering taking his own life. And so at that point, you've got a major red flag raised, because you've got a 21-year-old who's saying that they're thinking about taking their own life. And
this is within a couple of weeks of the operation?
This must have been within a week of the operation. And the GP referred him to A&E, which is the standard procedure. And A&E, frankly, is just not the right environment for someone in that state of mind. James didn't need to go and be seen by a doctor in a white coat. He was someone who just needed help unpacking his thoughts and trying to make sense of what was going on in his mind. And he didn't need to be in an environment, that sort of clinical environment, intense, people coming in and out with visible injuries. He sat in the waiting room for 2 hours as a low priority patient. And eventually he walked out, having not been seen, because he wasn't a priority. Now, my view, and I'm sure many would share this, is that if a 21-year-old man walks in and says, I'm considering taking my own life, they should be on life support, considering the thing that's most likely to kill them is themselves. And, that was his hour of need, and that was the only cry for help that he made, and unfortunately that cry for help wasn't answered. So that's really what we've tried to address. It's been a long journey to get there, obviously, and it was never the immediate objective, but really what we've tried to create with James's Place is a place that we think would have saved James, quite simply, and a place that when he'd made that cry for help would have been there for him, would have given him the appropriate help that he needed, the intervention that he required, and would have brought him out of crisis and allowed him to get hope for the future back. And he'd still be here today. He's not someone, I've said this before, James, I have no doubt in my mind, and I think all the members of my family share this. He wasn't someone who wanted to die. But unfortunately, he found himself in a situation where he couldn't find another, he couldn't see the alternative. And for him, the solution was to do what he did. And obviously it's the wrong solution, and it's an impulsive, irrational decision that he made. And in doing so, he's obviously left huge sadness behind him. And, obviously that we carry, but we've tried to reframe the sadness, and we've tried to channel all of the emotion and the energy that we feel into creating this legacy.
Which is incredible. And as a family, how did you deal with that in the early days? Because it must have been an incredible shock.
Yeah. I mean, obviously nothing prepares you for that. And, I mean, anyone who's gone through any form of grief, frankly, it's you can't really compute how you will get through it. But I think we all sort of have some instincts that are hardwired in us to navigate through the unthinkable. And so, yeah, I think the sort of weeks and months that followed, I mean, to be honest, a bit of a blur. I was 17 years old, I was in school, and I came out of school for a little bit. And I think for me, I was very lucky to have we retained and we still have a very tight family network, and we were all kind of there for each other. And then my friends were amazing, have always been amazing. I'm very lucky to have a really tight-knit group of buddies who helped me through that, and friends of James's who I became closer to and have stayed very close to ever since. But yeah, I mean, life after losing James was very hard, and obviously the charity, it came in time. It wasn't an immediate response, but my mum and dad, after a few months of sort of managing to start wrapping their heads around what had happened, I think there was a lot of goodwill that was coming at us from friends and family and others who were saying, what can we do to help? What can, like, if there's anything I can do, please let me know. And it just felt like we should try and harness that, because people genuinely wanted to do something, and it would have been a missed opportunity to not actually try and capture that in some way. And I'm so grateful to them, because they it was losing a loved one to suicide, or it brings with it certain sort of challenges and emotions. I remember initially feeling quite a lot of shame that my brother had taken his own life. It was embarrassing. And I felt that there must be a perception that, we're a sort of broken family, and I don't know. So I think there's that, that for a lot of people who've been affected by a suicide, by someone close to them, there are these sort of burdens that come with it. And
a feeling of what else could you have done?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're always going back through, particularly in the early days. I mean, now I'm sort of more at peace with everything, but in the very early days, it's just constantly questioning, how has this happened? What did I not? What could I have done? What did I not do? And that's something that I felt. It's something that my parents felt, my siblings and James's friends. I think that's a pretty universal feeling for anyone who's bereaved by suicide. You're always left with the lingering questions. But again, through time and having learnt so much about this world, you realise that someone taking their own life is generally speaking in quite an irrational frame of mind, and suicide is a preventable form of death, and it shouldn't be the biggest killer of men in the UK under the age of 35. It just shouldn't be, and we are doing things to change that. But yeah, I'm more at peace now with the circumstances of losing James, and just grateful that my mum and dad were brave enough to say, let's start a charity in his memory. Let's not shy away from this. This has happened, and we didn't know that actually the thing that was most likely to kill James was himself, and more people need to know this. And if we can save one person from suicide in his memory, then that will help us process this. And so the charity was initially started as a grant-giving trust, and we raised money in James's memory, and we did that for probably about, 10 years or so. And
so you'd raise money to give to other suicide prevention charities?
Correct. So other operational initiatives, so people kind of on the ground doing the sorts of things that we're doing now. And I think after a while we felt that actually the circumstances hadn't changed that much. You know, I think we felt that if one were to find themselves in a suicidal crisis at that point in time, 10 years on, the same sort of sequence of errors could have happened. You know, the right help wasn't necessarily there. And it was my mum who had this very clear vision of a place that she thought would have been able to save James. And so at that point in time, and we were a pretty lean operation at that point. There was I think we had one employee, and we were just really fundraising. And the board of trustees was, it was me, my mum, my dad, and a couple of others. And then we made this brave decision that actually we would change the model. We would become an operational charity, and that coincided with the Atlantic Row, which was able to raise the money that we needed to set up that first centre. So I sort of feel, we had some help from James at that point in time, because a lot of things sort of came together at a similar time and enabled us to create James's Place, which was taking quite a big risk, because we were going from doing something that we could sort of quite easily manage to creating an operational entity that would go on to, and now we employ over 50 people. So we don't go on to become quite an organization, and would try something quite pioneering in terms of the way that we deliver an intervention, and that operates in a high risk arena. We're dealing with people where I like to say we sort of operate at the sharp end of the mental health spectrum. So we're dealing with people who are in suicidal crisis. They are, and we focus on men, because that's the most at-risk group. So men are 3 times more likely to kill themselves than women. So the men that we see have expressed an intention to take their own life, or they've tried to take their own life. So we're trying to bring those people out of crisis. And it's been hugely successful. And we've been independently evaluated from day one of opening our Liverpool centre in 2018. We've had over 5,000 men through the doors of James's Place, and the impact is really meaningful. And we, as I said, we've evaluated the service from day one, or we've been evaluated from day one, and we can quantify the impacts that we're having on the men that are using the service, and categorically these individuals, as a consequence of the way that the intervention is delivered, the nature of the therapists that are delivering it, they're all trained specifically and qualified, and specifically focused on seeing men in suicidal crisis, is bringing these men out of crisis and restoring their hope for the future. And I've met many of the men who've used the service, and I would say all have told me that if it wasn't for James's Place, they wouldn't be here today. And these are men from all walks of life, of all ages. We've had men use the service from 18 to 85 across our 4 centres. And obviously 4 centres gives us a decent amount of coverage across the UK. But there's so much more that we should be doing and that we want to be doing. Obviously, the big barrier to our growth is raising money, because it's a free service, and we are entirely self-funded. So we're out always trying to raise money in order to enable us to grow, and obviously to sustain the operation. And hence, Journey for James, and this conversation right now.
What is it about the James's Place process or methodology that has been so successful?
In most cases, the men that are coming to see us have probably never engaged in any form of therapy, and they probably don't really want to be there. They've probably viewing it as maybe a bit of a sort of, why not? I'll give it a go. But they might be quite reluctant to go in the first place. And secondly, they may find it difficult to engage with the therapy if they are not someone who's necessarily ever emotionally been that open. So I think that's one of the things that we had to tackle, is try and devise a methodology that enables the conversation to begin, or enables us to build a picture of the individual, or the therapist, I should say, to build a picture of the individual sitting across from them without them necessarily even needing to open their mouth. So we have a model called Lay Your Cards on the Table, and we've devised these packs of cards, and they describe certain circumstances and situations. So the therapist will turn over a card and it might say, how have I got here? And then there'll be a corresponding pack of cards, and they'll lay them all out on the table. And the cards will explain different situations like, relationship breakdown, financial troubles, challenges at work, whatever it might be. And the man who is receiving the therapy can pick out the cards that actually resonate with them. And as I said, they don't necessarily even need to speak, and they might identify things on the table that they hadn't really thought of. And so it's been really effective, and it was developed by Jane Boland, who was our former sort of clinical lead, and I think she was the first employee of James's Place up in Liverpool. And we've developed it since, but it's an integral piece of sort of creating an understanding of the individual and delivering our intervention. And the men, generally speaking, respond very, very positively to it. So yeah, that's the quite unique core pillar of the intervention. I mean, that's one component, I suppose, in terms of how we differentiate ourselves from other services. I mean, we're a free service. We will see men in a very short space of time. So, obviously, these are individuals who are at risk to themselves, and our view is that they should get urgent care. So it's very important to us that we're able to get an appointment in and see these individuals very quickly. The setting is quite special. So every James's Place is quite unique, and it's really the antithesis of an A&E. So A&E, think bright lights, white walls, very clinical. A James's Place is like walking into a wonderful home, very comfortable, and you're met by a lovely receptionist. You're offered a cup of tea. The therapists are all trained and qualified, not volunteers. Again, we think if we're dealing with people whose lives are at risk, they should be getting the best care available. So those are some of the things that make our service quite unique. And I suppose one other thing to mention is the fact that we are male only, and that often gets questioned. Why are you only seeing men? And obviously, men and women are just as likely to experience emotional distress, mental health problems. And this might sound like a generalization, but women are generally better at managing their mental health, better at having conversations before they get to crisis, better at going and sitting down with a friend. And us men are a bit more prone to bottling up, expecting things to get better without really addressing the issue, hence ending up in crisis. And obviously we don't want men to be in crisis, but the circumstances are that men are 3 times more likely to kill themselves than women. And so we are addressing the more at-risk group. And we deliver an intervention that is tailored to men. So I think those sort of factors have influenced that decision.
And hence the cards and the benefit of the cards in terms of them being able to point to cards rather than try and articulate how they're feeling.
Correct.
Talk to me about the terminology to commit suicide.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I think probably immediately after James died, I think I'd probably, if I was to describe to someone the circumstances, I might have said James committed suicide. And I suppose over time, I've come to learn, or we've all come to learn, that that's sort of archaic language. That's harks back to the days that to take your own life was to commit a crime. And so to commit suicide was to commit a crime. And so I suppose, we are advocates for changing some of the language, because in changing the language, you also reduce the stigma. And in reducing the stigma, you help enable conversations to happen, very important conversations to happen, and reduce that shame. Because, these individuals who find themselves in a crisis, they are probably feeling very shameful about their situation, wrongly, incorrectly. But there's a burden that they're carrying, and a big part of that burden can be shame. So if you have rhetoric, sort of language like to commit suicide, I suppose that in a way is contributing towards that shame. And so, I would always say my brother took his own life now, and I wouldn't use the word to commit suicide, because it's sort of archaic language, but it's obviously very, very widely used.
What can we do to engage people who might be feeling suicidal?
I would say, if you're ever concerned about someone, and this is something that I think there's a greater understanding of now. There's a misconception that if you were to ask someone directly that you were concerned about, have you thought about taking your own life, or something along those lines, that you might sort of plant the seed in their mind or something. But actually, the truth is that in asking that very direct question, you may well be unlocking the unspeakable thing for them. And it's a very hard question to ask someone. And for that reason, it doesn't get asked. We tend to, particularly us Brits, will skirt around the issue and we'll sort of dance around the sidelines. But I would say, I wish I asked James. I obviously I didn't know that was even on the radar, but I have no doubt in my mind that if I had asked him that, if I had enough of an inclination to ask him that very challenging question, I think that could have unlocked this dialogue, and that could have changed the course. And then we could have implemented the right help and taken him out of this crisis. So it's such a hard thing to do, but if you're ever that concerned about someone, asking them the direct question is highly recommended. And that individual will probably be very grateful for your concern. And I suppose there's nothing to lose in asking that question. So that would be my advice, and that is generally the advice out there for what to do if you're concerned about someone. And obviously there's various information online about services that you can point someone in the direction of, and what to do if you're feeling concerned about someone's well-being.
The listeners generally of this podcast are those who work in real estate and real assets. Have you got any stats or data that relate to our industry?
Well, yes. In the construction industry, there is a major suicide issue. So in the UK alone, on average, 2 construction workers take their own lives every working day. And suicide is the leading cause of death amongst construction workers, so above accidents. And, you hear a lot about safety in the workplace and safety on building sites, but you probably don't hear so much about mental health on building sites. And that's the leading cause of death amongst construction workers. So I would say a major challenge in the construction sector. We've been trying to do some work amongst construction related businesses. We're doing quite a lot of outreach as a charity, going in on site, meeting with construction teams and actually having very positive engagements. And we've even had referrals as a direct consequence of some of those meetings. So people referring themselves. So there's a lot to do in that space. But we are all, whatever sector we work in, I think we all need to be tuned into the risks that are out there, and the prevalence of suicide as a society and across the world, frankly. And the unfortunate reality is that whilst we're doing some good work with James's Place, we are fighting a bit of an uphill struggle, and so suicide rates right now are at their highest levels since 1999, which is quite staggering. And so the need for our service has probably never been more acute. So there's all the more reason for us to keep sort of trying to roll out more centres. I think one other thing that I wanted to mention on just sort of touching on our industry was some of the amazing goodwill that we've had from businesses working in this arena. And obviously with my day job, I'm interacting with agents, planning consultants, lawyers, and many other professionals. And we as a charity operate in physical centres across the UK. And with every one of those centres, when we open a new centre, we obviously have to source the building. We have to adapt it to suit our needs. And we have to create a space that we think is unique and helps give those individuals going to it that sense of hope and positivity. And we've been extremely fortunate to benefit from some amazing pro bono support from so many organizations across our industry. And so I'm not going to sort of go through and name all of them, but you know who you are. And I think it's probably just a nice moment to reflect on all of the goodwill that is out there in our industry. And yeah, we've been huge beneficiaries of it.
So just coming back to the challenge, you're about to embark on a 400-mile ultra endurance triathlon. You're a dad, you're a husband, you've got a busy, stressful job. How on earth have you fitted the kind of the training into your day, your week, your month? It's
been challenging. I won't lie. I suppose something has to give if you're sort of introducing a whole new thing into your life like this, and it's requiring quite a lot of me, both on the training and also just sort of sorting out some of the logistics. And so I've had to find time to fit that in. And I suppose it's my sleep that's probably taken a bit of the brunt of that. I'm getting up very early these days, which I'm actually, in a weird way, quite enjoying. So I get up early and I get out before 6, and I try and do my training nice and early in the morning to make sure that I'm back either in time to start the working day or to be a dad, and to keep everyone at home on side. And so yeah, it's really, but the challenge is now, as I get nearer to the start, the miles are amping up, and more miles means more minutes, more hours out training. And in this phase now where we're sort of, about a month out from the challenge, it's a cycle might be a 6-hour ride. A paddleboard might be a 6-hour paddleboard. And so it's a big chunk of time. And obviously I can only do that on a weekend. So I'm trying to get up nice and early and make sure I'm back sort of by latest mid-morning to be a responsible present father.
Yeah.
And husband.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a full-on team effort.
It is. Yeah. So kudos to my darling wife for putting up with it. And I think she'll be quite glad when it's all done. But she's obviously very supportive.
So how can we get involved individually, but corporately as well, in terms of getting behind you, getting behind the challenge and raising a bucket load of money and enabling you to smash through your target and keep you going on this absolutely mega ultra triathlon?
So, well, firstly, thank you for having me on, and for giving me a bit of a platform to tell your listeners about this challenge. And the objective is to raise 100,000. As it stands, I'm about 15% of the way there. So there's a long way to go, but I feel sort of cautiously optimistic that we'll get there. And I think a lot of the funds will start hopefully coming in once people see the pain I'm putting myself through. So yeah, obviously any contributions towards the fundraising effort would be hugely appreciated. Every single pound raised goes directly towards delivering our service. To give a bit of sort of context, £2,000 will see a man through James's Place. So through the initial welcome assessment and subsequent sessions to get them out of crisis and restore hope for the future. So £2,000 could save a life. And I'm not suggesting that every one of your listeners is suddenly going to donate £2,000, but that gives a bit of a sense of how much impact one can have. And yeah, this is really, the purpose is to keep raising money, to keep growing the charity and make sure that we can access more men. We've just opened Birmingham, and next year we'll be opening another centre. And each centre will have 500 men on average, plus minus, through its doors each year. So that's 500 men in suicidal crisis and 500 men who are sort of being drawn out of that challenging place and hopefully having some hope restored.
I know it hasn't been easy. There've been injuries, there've been niggles. Mentally, is this the toughest challenge you've taken on?
I think at this point in life, it's been quite challenging because there's obviously a bit of juggling that's going on. And I think, I don't know, I'm slightly going into the unknown with it. I've put myself through, I'm being coached by a lovely guy called Gus Barton who trained my crew for the transatlantic row, and he specializes in training endurance athletes. So he's been helping me. I've been on a program with him, not sort of cutting any corners, making sure that I'm doing everything I should. But obviously, I wasn't a big paddleboarder, surprise, before this, and I've had to sort of try and learn that skill. I've never been a big cyclist, so again, that's sort of something I'm exposing myself to a bit more. I have always run, but I've never run more than a marathon, and these will be 34-mile days, so quite a bit more than a marathon per day. So I'm doing as much as I can, but I'm sure probably halfway through the ride on day one, I'll already be into the abyss and wondering what on earth I'm doing to myself, and it will be a bit of mind over matter at that stage.
So as well as the financial contribution, is there anything else that we can do to kind of help get behind you and get behind the charity?
I mean, if you can share it, if you can, read up on James's Place, have a look at our social media, have a look at our website. There's more information on there about what we do. Talk amongst your friends, not just about us, but try and create those discussions. If you're ever worried about someone, try and ask those difficult questions. Try and be there for them. And the more we can talk, the more that we can reduce stigma, and the more that we can address the problem that is suicide.
Harry, thank you so much for coming in and sharing the microphone with me. It's been such a privilege to sit across and talk to a friend. You're a massive inspiration to me and a complete legend. And I'm really excited to see you smash this challenge. And I'm really hopeful that the whole industry gets behind you. And can do everything they can to support you and the incredible work you're doing. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Matt.
There we go.
Cheers, buddy.
Mate, thank you.
Legend. Really appreciate it.
No, you are a very special dude, I have to say.